Chapter 1. The Kingdom No One Respected. Expanded Origin. Macedon was not supposed to matter. To the Greek world, it was the outskirts of civilization. Not quite barbaric, but not quite respected either. It was the kind of place powerful city-states like Athens mentioned only when it was convenient. A buffer zone, a military inconvenience. But beneath that perception, something dangerous was forming. Because under King Philip II, Macedon was not just surviving, it was being engineered. Philip did not think like a poet king. He thought like a strategist who understood a brutal truth. The world does not reward the civilized. It rewards the prepared. So he rebuilt everything. He redesigned the army into something the Greeks had never seen before. The Macedonian phalanx was not just soldiers standing in rows. It was discipline turned into geometry. Long spears, overlapping shields, layers of depth that turned human bodies into moving fortresses. And most importantly, he trained them to move as one organism, not individuals, a system. And systems are what change history. By the time Alexander was a child, he wasn't growing up in a kingdom trying to survive anymore. He was growing up inside a machine built for expansion. Chapter 2. The Child Between Two Myths. Alexander's childhood was not ordinary. It was a collision of two powerful forces. His father, Philip, who taught him conquest through discipline, and his mother, Olympias, who taught him destiny through myth. Olympias did not raise Alexander to think he was average. She raised him to believe he was chosen. Stories surrounded him from early on, that his birth had divine signs, that gods had intervened, that he carried something beyond human lineage. Whether these stories were true didn't matter. What mattered is that Alexander believed he was meant for something larger than life itself. And belief like that is not harmless. It becomes identity, and identity becomes direction. Chapter 3. Aristotle and the Architecture of a Mind. At around 13, Alexander was given a teacher who would quietly shape the future of the world. Aristotle, one of the greatest thinkers in human history. But Aristotle did not just teach him philosophy. He gave him a way to interpret reality. He taught logic, politics, ethics, natural sciences, geography, medicine. But more importantly, he taught him how systems function, how societies rise, and how they collapse. Alexander was not learning to memorize knowledge. He was learning to see patterns behind power. And one idea struck him deeper than all others. Greatness is not inherited. It is constructed. From that point on, Alexander stopped thinking like a prince. He started thinking like a force. Chapter 4. Bucephalus and the First Lesson of Control. The horse Bucephalus became one of the earliest symbols of Alexander's mindset. A massive war stallion, wild, uncontrollable. Every experienced rider failed. Philip dismissed it as useless, but Alexander noticed something others didn't. The horse wasn't aggressive, it was reactive, fearful of its own shadow. So Alexander made a simple decision. He turned the horse toward the sun and removed the problem entirely. Then he mounted it and rode it. That moment wasn't about strength. It was about perception. Because Alexander understood something early. Most obstacles are not removed by force. They are removed by understanding. Chapter 5. The moment the world broke open. Philip II was assassinated. No warning, no transition, no stability. Just sudden collapse of order. And at 20 years old, Alexander became king. But Macedon was not a peaceful inheritance. It was a volatile system held together by fear and structure, and when structure weakens, everything tests it. Immediately, rebellions began forming. City-states questioned legitimacy. Enemies moved quickly. Even allies waited to see if he would fail. Alexander's response was immediate and absolute. He did not negotiate uncertainty. He eliminated it. Chapter 6. Thebes and the Language of Fear. The city of Thebes believed they could break free. They underestimated Alexander. They assumed youth meant weakness. They were wrong. Alexander marched south at speed, and when he arrived, there was no prolonged diplomacy. There was no hesitation. There was only enforcement. Thebes was destroyed. Not partially, completely. The scale of destruction was intentional. It was not just punishment. It was communication. Every Greek city understood the message instantly. Resistance would not be defeated. It would be erased. Fear is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is strategy. Chapter 7. The real target. Greece was never the destination. It was the training ground. The real object of Alexander's ambition was the Persian Empire, a civilization that had ruled vast territories for centuries. Rich, organized, massive, and undefeated at scale. But Alexander did not see it as an obstacle. He saw it as unfinished history. In 334 BC, he crossed into Asia, and the world changed direction. Chapter 8. The First Collision. At the Granicus River, Alexander faced his first major Persian force. Local governors and cavalry units attempted to stop him early. They expected hesitation. They received aggression. Alexander did not wait for advantage. He created it through speed. He personally led charges, breaking formation structures, shattering coordination, and forcing collapse through momentum. It was not a battle of numbers. It was a battle of tempo, and Alexander controlled tempo better than anyone alive. Chapter 9. Issus and the moment power revealed itself. Then came Darius III. The Persian king himself entered the battlefield. This was no longer a regional conflict. This was empire-level war. At Issus, Darius had more men, more space, more resources. On paper, Alexander should have lost. But warfare is not paper. It is psychology under pressure. As the battle intensified, Macedonian lines strained. For a moment, collapse felt possible. But Alexander saw something critical. Darius was exposed, so he made a decision that defied logic. He broke formation and drove directly toward the king, not to win the battle, but to end its meaning. Darius fled. And when leadership disappears, armies stop being armies. They become crowds. Chapter 10. Tyre and the limit of human engineering. The city of Tyre was not meant to fall. It was built on an island, fortified, protected by water. A siege nightmare. For 7 months, Alexander's army worked against it, building causeways, extending land, engineering access where none existed. It was not just warfare. It was construction under fire. Eventually, the city fell. And the aftermath was brutal. Not because Alexander enjoyed destruction, but because he understood precedent. Some cities must fall completely, so others do not resist partially. Chapter 11. The king who became a symbol. Egypt was different. When Alexander entered, he was not resisted. He was accepted. Egypt had seen empires come and go. They recognized power when they saw it. But Alexander did something unexpected. He adapted. He honored their gods. He visited their temples, and he was declared something more than a conqueror, a liberator. He founded Alexandria, a city that would outlive him by thousands of years, a center of knowledge, science, philosophy, and culture. Chapter 12. Gaugamela and the Death of an Empire. The final confrontation came at Gaugamela. Darius gathered everything. This was the last stand. The battlefield was open, perfect for Persian numerical advantage. But Alexander did not rely on numbers. He relied on structure. His army moved like a coordinated system. Phalanx pressure, cavalry flanking, precision exploitation. And once again, Darius fled, and with him, the Persian Empire collapsed, not slowly, but structurally. Chapter 13. India and the Limit of Ambition. Alexander continued east, into lands no Greek had ever controlled, into India. There he faced King Porus, a brutal battle involving war elephants and monsoon terrain. It was costly, exhausting, and different from everything before. Alexander won. But something changed. His army no longer had the same certainty. They had reached the edge of endurance, not physically alone, but psychologically. Even conquest has limits. Chapter 14: The Return of a Changed Man. The journey back was worse than the journey forward. Exhaustion, heat, losses. But Alexander himself was changing. He began adopting Persian customs, trying to unify cultures instead of replacing them. He envisioned something unprecedented, a blended empire, but his army resisted. They saw it as betrayal. Tension began to grow. The system that had conquered the world was starting to fracture internally. Chapter 15: The Final Night. In Babylon, after a banquet, Alexander became ill. Rapid decline. Weakness spread quickly. Then silence, and at 32 years old, he died. No definitive cause, only speculation. Illness, poison, history never agreed. But what is certain is this: the most powerful man in the known world disappeared instantly. Chapter 16: The Empire that couldn't hold itself together. Without him, everything collapsed. No clear successor, no unified command. His generals divided the empire. Wars erupted. Regions split. The system dissolved into fragments. Empires built by one mind rarely survive without it. Chapter 17: The Legacy that Outlived Reality. But something else survived. Greek culture spread across Asia, Egypt, and the Middle East. Knowledge systems expanded. Cities flourished. And centuries later, even Rome absorbed the influence. Alexander did not just conquer geography, he reshaped civilization. And over time, he stopped being a man in history and became a symbol within it. Final chapter: The question that never dies. So who was Alexander? A genius strategist, a divine myth wrapped in human form, a conqueror driven by ambition beyond restraint. The truth is not one answer. It is all of them at once. Because some figures do not fit inside history, they bend it. And Alexander the Great was one of them.